here. So I'm going to begin recording, and I'm going to, please don't take this personally. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody, just so we can keep the ancillary noise to a minimum. And Beth and Sarah, you're free to unmute yourselves. So let us begin with prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. God of love, in these times of transition and change, unite our nation, guide our leaders with your wisdom. Give us courage to follow our hopes and overcome our fears. Help us to build a future where we are gentle with one another and in which your justice and mercy flow down like water and all prosper and share. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. All right, well, welcome everybody. We have two amazing guests with us today. We have Beth Silvers and Sarah Holland, and they are the authors of a book called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, a guide to grace-filled political conversations. It's a book that some of us have been reading on the side, and some of us in these forums on Sunday mornings have been talking about chapter by chapter. But I know a lot of people haven't read the book. I know some of you are here for the first time this morning. So I just want to invite Sarah and Beth. Maybe if you guys want to just take a moment and say hello, introduce yourselves, and maybe share with us if for somebody who hasn't read the book, who's not familiar, what are you trying to say in the book? What inspired you to write it? And what have you learned in the process? So go ahead. Welcome.
Good morning. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're delighted to be with you, especially at such a poignant political moment. So thanks for spending this time with us, even though I'm sure that everyone is ready to take a breath and move on from thinking so much about elections. The two of us are friends from college. We were in the same sorority. We kind of went our separate ways after college and joined up together 13 years later, more than 13 years later, to start having some conversations about politics, because we knew that we had very different personalities and some different perspectives on what government's job is in terms of problem solving. Sarah suggested to me that we start a podcast. I didn't know what a podcast was, but I was in for the challenge. So we started talking once a week at first. That quickly became twice a week. It ultimately became 3 times a week. And we did that for a couple of years, and we just dove right into talking about the hardest issues that the country faces, the most divisive issues that the country faces. And we realized that it was much easier than it sounds to just pick up in a discussion. At this point, Sarah and I did not know each other as adults at all. We hadn't been close friends in college, so we weren't building on this foundation of being the best friends. We sat down to talk explicitly about politics, and that's really where our conversations stayed for quite some time. And then, of course, doing this so frequently, we became good friends, and Sarah's one of the most important people in my life now. So I think with the book, we wanted to reflect on what we had been doing. We had been trying to practice grace-filled conversations where we were gentle with each other, as you've been talking about this morning, conversations where we were just trying to learn more about each other. We were never coming together to try to convince the other person of anything. We certainly have influenced each other over time, and that influence exceeds politics. You know, we've influenced each other in many ways. And I think one of our biggest learnings is that politics can't just be put in a separate container. It really permeates who we are, and it is a shorthand way to express, this is how I want us to live in community with one another. So with the book, we wanted to say what we had been doing, name the things that help us have these conversations, try to share some principles that could help other people have these conversations. Sarah, what am I not sharing?
I think that's a really great introduction. The book came about because through this work on the podcast and through building our own relationship and our own understanding of how to be gentle in conversation with each other, and how to be curious about our own positions, and how to be better informed, or have a more holistic approach to our media consumption, all these different things. We built these skills and began thinking about, could we put these skills and these lessons we've learned over the several years of podcasting together into a book? And that's where I think you're wrong, but I'm listening came from. We wanted to sort of articulate the journey we've taken with each other through some principles that other people could apply. Now, I think so often people hear about our book and they think that it is, it's a hack to how to get people to hear you or how to get people to agree with you. And that's not what it is. I mean, I wish I had a hack. I tried for at least the first 20 years of my life to figure out, how to get people to see the world through my perspective. And by that, I mean how to see how wrong they were and how right I was. But it just never worked. The long reads and the articles I would share, and like, can't you just see this? And the shame and the righteousness, like, it was exhausting, and it just felt like I was never getting anywhere. And so, being able to articulate an approach that works on the other person, for sure, hopefully, but most importantly on yourself. The book is divided into 2 sections. It's the work you do on yourself. The first 5 steps are really sort of internal work, where you're thinking through your own positions and your own posture in the world and your own default stress behaviors and your own short-sightedness and all those things, just really working on yourself so that you can then go out and really approach someone with an open heart and with gentleness and with curiosity, so that you can continue this practice, because it's never really done. I don't care what side of the political aisle that you woke up on in America today. If you look around and are like, and we're done, then you're not paying attention, because we're not done. We have so much work to do with each other, on each other, in the world, on our own country, on our own systems. And so what we hope is that the process we've laid out in the book really helps people build a practice. So many people have asked us, like, well, don't you kind of secretly want Donald Trump to win? Because isn't it good for your podcast? Won't people check out? And I really hope not. We were never supposed to be a podcast where you would just come and exercise your sort of political emotions and then go back to your life. I don't want politics to be a hobby, because I think it's too important. I've always thought it was too important. But I hope what people do is learn to engage and learn to do it in a holistic and sustainable way, because we have to sustain that. We have to, whether you are, like I said, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, like the wave and crash is not healthy. We need to find a way to sort of to what's the word I want, to sort of float or doggy paddle or do some sort of combination of the two, so that we can live in community and work on this stuff and not be in this constant cycle of burning out or crashing or swinging the pendulum this way or this way or this way. Because we have long-term problems to get to. And when you're in that short-term cycle of up, down, up, down, up, down, that's hard to do. And so, I think that was always our perspective from the book. Let's show people how we've built this practice through the podcast, so that they can go out and build this practice in their own lives.
Yeah, that really comes through, that you guys kind of take a marathon approach. It's a way of being with one another rather than a way of winning arguments every 4 years when everybody is ginned up to the max and we're talking about the most important election of your lifetime once again, right? Yeah, that really comes through. And I really appreciated, we noticed this in the beginning of your book. You guys really have a commitment to that we really need to start talking about politics again, that it's integral to our democracy, that we actually engage in politics rather than do what we have been taught to do, which is to avoid the topic. Could you say a bit more about that?
I think the problem in America right now is not that too few people are talking about politics, but that too few people are talking about politics and also listening and also challenging their beliefs and also asking questions about politics. We really have retreated to spaces that feel affirming, and we are reluctant to get into spaces that don't feel affirming. So the result of that is that American politics seems to be governed right now by who has the biggest pep rally. And that is not space for growth. It's not space for reflection. It's not space for learning. It's not space for figuring out a 75 million to 70 million vote disparity, as one of your colleagues has pointed out here. You know, it's just, we aren't practicing the kind of skills that allow us to negotiate with one another, or to influence each other, or to just work on a problem effectively. And so what we're advocating is that if we can't around our kitchen tables or our Thanksgiving tables or in our congregations or workplaces, speak with people who we already love, we already have relationships with, in a way that makes room for a variety of perspectives. We can't really expect that to happen in Washington, D.C. either, or in our state houses, or even in our school boards. And so we need to build those skills over time. To your point, marathon, not sprint. And marathons take a lot of training, and we're just not doing that training right now.
Mhm.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think the other important perspective is that it's not just, you know, so far we've been talking very much like here or here, the 70 million over here, the 74 million over here. But the truth is that there's like 30 million over here, 30 million over here, and 80 million in the middle who don't ride that wave, who stay pretty checked out, who don't, you know, live and breathe politics like a lot of us do. They're either not, they're low engagement, they're independent, they're turned off by both parties, or by the people who are obsessed with politics. They just want to live their lives. And so, you know, I think that acknowledging part of what I hope when we say, like exactly what Beth was saying, we want to talk and listen and engage. We open up a path for those people as well. We don't say like it's all or nothing. You're on this team or in this team, and you better be like believe to the core that one team is the enemy. But we allow space for people who, first of all, often don't engage because they don't like conflict. Especially women, I think, are taught that to stay away from politics because it makes everybody uncomfortable. Or who feel cynical about the process, like it doesn't matter, or who feel very
and you know, there's a lot going on there, and I think that we have to really acknowledge that it's not often as simple as this and this, that there's it's a big country and we're complicated people, and opening up a path in the conversation and a way for people who maybe don't fall all the way here or all the way there to.
There's just a little bit back and forth on your mic there. Yeah, you're obviously noticed
yeah,
that.
I'm gonna fix it.
While you're doing that, maybe Beth, you could share, maybe then Sarah, you could share of the different skills that you guys mentioned that you kind of built, the skills that we're being called to sort of exercise and build up ourselves. What for you would you say are probably the most important? What would have been the most powerful in your life in terms of allowing you to engage with those who are in a graceful way with those who are very different?
Curiosity has been the most important for me, and thinking of curiosity as a discipline. When we first started talking about curiosity in connection with the book, we had several people say to us, aren't you just kind of naturally a curious person or not? And I've really come to reject that, because I see curiosity as something that you can intentionally cultivate all the time. And so I have just become a better, not just a better like political podcaster, but a better thinker, and a better writer and a better speaker, and I think a better parent, certainly a better friend, because I've learned to just keep digging for a more interesting question. And that's helped me, coming from a traditionally conservative background, to better understand my friends who come from a traditionally more progressive background, because asking questions is a way that helps me kind of dig out of that sense that things have been good and we hold on to what has been because we think it's good. Being able to be curious about that. What did I miss in my assessment that what has been is good? What do you see that could be better? How could we get there in ways that preserve some of what I believe is good? Just practicing those questions all the time and learning to not have an instant reaction. So something we've been talking about a lot lately on the podcast is the Supreme Court, as lots of the country who pays attention to politics has. And my gut reaction is always to say, we have 9 justices for a reason. It's worked pretty well for a long time. Let's hang on to 9 justices. And so curiosity as a discipline helps bring me into, well, how did we get there? And what was behind the decision to go to 9? And what have discussions about increasing that number been like over time? And what could the benefits of that be that I'm not seeing? And just on with questions. And again, asking a better question does not always lead me to exactly the same conclusion as anyone that I'm speaking to. And that's not the point. It's just to think more expansively. And then it opens up room and conversations for us to all kind of unpack what's really motivating me here, what's really going on in my thinking and in yours.
Yeah, we really noticed that in the example you guys give in the book about how you both came at the question of welfare, right? The welfare debate. You kind of both came at it from the traditional right and left perspectives, but you both realized, we really don't know that much about this, so let's dig into it. And you dug into the history and you learned about welfare reform in the 90s and all of that. And you both came out of that curiosity with a wildly different understanding of the topic and a different point of view, it seemed to me. And you both kind of found yourselves grappling with a solution that you had never really even heard before, this idea of the minimum income.
Universal basic income.
Yeah. I thought that was a wonderful example.
I think for better or for worse, we have been taught that politics is good, bad, black, white, yes, no. Some of that is because we have a winner-take-all system, and so we elect in a way that has to be very binary and has to be very like good, bad, winner, loser. And so it puts us in that position, that sort of posture. Mm-hmm. But it's never that simple. Never. In a country of 300 million people, there is no such thing as a simple issue. Even things that we feel profoundly about, like there might be a right answer. There might be a moral and right position. There certainly are in politics, and there certainly are issues that I feel are moral and right and that I would not budge from. But that doesn't mean that the people who feel differently than you are got there because they're bad. Like there might be complicated reasons for why they are in opposition to you that aren't as simple as like they're terrible. And so part of curiosity is not only being willing and able to search and ask questions, but to be ready to sit with the comfort and tension when there's not an easy answer. That welfare example is good. And also it wraps up pretty neatly. They're not all like that.
Right.
They're not all like that.
Right.
There are issues that we could dig into, and I'm gonna come out feeling just as profoundly as I did going in. Mm-hmm. And there won't be a thing like universal basic income that's like easy and neat and be like, see, look, there's this thing that we can compromise on. That's not always gonna be true. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're just gonna have to sit with like, I don't know the answer. I don't know. There is no space here for both of us to get to places where we are equally comfortable. I always think about it like we talk a lot about the analogy of driving a car and the gas and the brakes, but sometimes I wonder if a clutch would probably be a better metaphor, because when you learn to drive a stick shift, I remember when I learned to drive a stick shift, you think, well, I'll get the gas and the clutch equally in the middle. That's how you drive, right? Like you want to like lift and press till they're both in the middle. But every car is different. Sometimes you have to just barely let off the gas and put the clutch all the way down. And sometimes you have to barely let off the clutch and put the gas all the way down. Like that balance in each car is very different. And with each issue, that's going to be different. You know, on some sides, one is going to have to give a lot, and it's going to feel like a threat to their existence in order to reach any type of forward motion. I wish it was I wish we could find places where it just, look at that, how easy that was, but it's not going to be like that. And I think part of curiosity is understanding, like, it's not just the posture of I'm curious, but it's maybe getting curious and getting to a space where you don't know anything else. Like, you have no additional insight or no additional, maybe not an additional insight. I feel like you always gain additional insight, but no like solution. Like, you're just going to have to maintain that sense of tension.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a challenging thing, isn't it? We like black and white. We like easy answers. We like to know which team we're on. It gives us a sense of security. I don't have to look into that issue anymore. I don't have to get into the messy nuances and the complexity that is behind all of these issues. You guys are very much policy wonks, strike me as. A lot of people aren't willing to do that type of digging in, you know, to create a primer on a topic and to really do that diving in. You guys have any suggestions on how do we engage with folks? Maybe we come at it from a perspective of open-mindedness and curiosity. How do we engage when the person we're talking with is really just isn't interested? It is just wants to talk about the talking points. To just wants to parrot back what they've been hearing in their echo chamber, right, on their favorite news channel. How do you engage with somebody in that? Do you have any advice for that? That's a tough one, isn't it?
Well, I would say that the title of the book is not curiosity-filled political conversations, it's grace-filled conversations. And you can absolutely give grace without receiving it in return. And that is definitely going to be the case in some conversations. You are going to give grace, you are going to make space, you are going to be curious, and the other person is not and will not budge. But I think the only sign of progress, the only sign of influence, is not always articulated clearly in ways we recognize. We're not in that person's head. That person can still be parroting every partisan talking point. They can still be trying to unlock the secrets of Q for you outwardly. But inwardly, you know, I'm not sure if there are very many human interactions that don't have influence. I think that that's not how we're built. We are finely tuned to each other. And so I'm not sure there's ever a case, you know, you might not see it, you might not feel it, and they may certainly not be articulating any sort of movement in their positions or understanding of perspective. But, you know, I think grace is a subtle and often invisible force. And if you are giving grace, you are influencing that person. And you are working on yourself as well too, right? Like every interaction is not meant to change the person's mind. It's meant to be an embodiment of our values for ourselves just as much as the other person. And so I think keeping that in mind when it's really difficult is important too.
It's not like we talk about politics separate and apart from all the other dynamics that exist in a relationship. And so I think if you're talking with someone and they start parroting talking points to you, it can be good to just think about the entirety of your relationship with that person and what else they might be telling you by wanting to share those talking points, and where they have felt like there hasn't been room for them maybe in your thinking, or where they felt disrespected by something about you, or where they try to exercise control over you. It's not always that someone's hurting. Sometimes someone's being hurtful. But none of that exists in its own container. And so I think understanding that every political conversation we have with someone else is it is going to have some bearing on how much trust exists in that relationship. And so I try to walk in always saying, even if I don't make a dent in how this person is thinking politically, can I increase their trust in our relationship? Because if our trust is increasing over time, we are going to have better conversations over time. We're going to have different conversations. We're going to have conversations that might take one of us in a new direction, or both of us in a new direction. And so, you know, you can work on the subject matter all you want, but if you're not simultaneously working on the relationship, it's always going to stall out.
Yeah, it seems as though there's a little bit of a surrender, a posture of being willing to surrender in conversations and give up on this idea that I'm in this to convince you, I'm in this to change your mind, I'm in this to win, I'm in this to be proven right, whatever. Just surrender to that. Just let go of all those needs, and instead, almost come into it with a posture of curiosity, as you're saying, not just about the issue, but about the person. Tell me about your life. What, tell me what's behind that passion you have for whatever topic. Tell me more about your life. And then as you say, you build a relationship.
And I think the first thing you have to surrender is the fear that surrendering to the building of trust in the relationship also equals surrendering your deeply held convictions. Those are two different things. You can, as Sarah said, feel as passionately and as firmly about something exiting a conversation as you felt going into it, and still be humble within the context of the conversation and the relationship. We kind of have this sense that every political discussion, especially people who don't talk politics often, they'll like psych themselves up. Okay, I'm stealing my resolve. I'm ready to go talk to my dad about this. That's the example we get from our listeners a lot. I'm ready to go talk to my dad about this. So I've got to read every article. I have to know everything. I have to anticipate every objection he's going to have. And I'm going to go in. This is my one shot to really move the needle here. And it's just not like that. And the more we can kind of put that fear down, then we'll be prepared to surrender in that more personal way.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on this one engagement, when you go into it with that type of agenda.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that has been brought up by I think the number one question I hear from folks in this class and from others is, how do you guys recommend grace-filled conversations when you're really struggling with that basic foundation of what is truth? When the other person is now, we live in this world where we almost are building two alternate realities, depending on which news channels you watch. If you can't even get to those basic foundational questions of, I don't know, for example, COVID-19 is dangerous. Where do you go from there?
I think this is where gentleness is really important with ourselves, because that is not a thing that individuals can fix by themselves in conversation one-on-one. And by that, I mean, there are huge societal issues with why we are segregating, operating under different assumptions, feeling like we live in different universes. And I think if we walk into conversations feeling like we need to solve that for the other person, to drag that other person back into reality, we're going to feel frustrated and overwhelmed constantly. So be gentle with yourself that when you encounter that, there are forces much bigger at work, right? We have a lot of issues as a society. We have social media. We have right now a pandemic that is leading to isolation. We have people living away from their families more than they have ever before. We have, media choices that were inconceivable merely 40 years ago. So I just, I hope that people can, because I'm that person, I feel like personally obligated to fix it. That's my personality. And so I have to remind myself, like, I alone did not get us here. I alone did not get that person here. And I alone will not get us out. So just sort of being gentle with yourself, because I think it is a really big issue. And then I think in the moment with the person, Beth has a really good approach where she says, I feel like we, maybe it's a sibling or maybe it's a family member. I feel like we grew up in such similar ways. Isn't it interesting that we see the world so differently? Just invite a little zoom out. Isn't this fascinating that you and I can't agree on the basics? Do you think something else may be in play here rather than just us, taking in our information and reaching conclusions? If we can't agree on the most basic things, like, what do you think's going on? I mean, I think where I feel conversations that are the most productive is where I acknowledge, like, instead of you're the problem, more of a like, this is a problem. What do you think's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And I get a lot of, it feels like we're getting somewhere, or we're connecting, or when we both take that posture of like, isn't this awful that we can't agree on the most basic things? What's going on? As opposed to, you're wrong, you don't understand, you're refusing to see reality. Because underlying that is this assumption that this person who in theory we're in connection with and we love is an idiot. Nobody likes to feel that way. I get in this with my father a lot, who has very different political opinions than me. I mean, I texted him yesterday and said, what I'm hearing you articulate is that you think I want America to fail. Do you think I want America to fail? I have 3 little kids. Like, why would you think that? But I don't think it wasn't as if he was coming at me like, Sarah wants America to fail. He's just operating in this space that if you do not believe this way, if not X, then Y, forget the person he's applying this to, Mm-hmm. And I just think that's it's really hard. I mean, it's hurtful. I have a friend who's really struggling with her mother. And her mother, she feels like her mother is basically attacking her faithfulness because she voted a different way. And it's really hurtful for her. It's really hurtful to feel like the person who raised you doesn't think that you're being a faithful Christian because of the way you voted. And so I think acknowledging that it's hurtful, acknowledging that it's hard, and acknowledging that it's a big situation, much bigger than all of us in our individual relationships, can lead to some of that gentleness.
Yeah, it strikes me that in that moment where you're in a conversation with somebody, and it could be a family member, I've had this happen to me as well, and they throw a pretty significant accusation at you. Well, you just don't love our country, you're just not patriotic, or whatever it happens to be. When you get that, you're kind of in a moment there where you can decide to fire back, and you could decide to criticize them or the source of that news or whatever opinion, or you could say, as you did, you could model a kind of thing of like, you know what, I can't tell you how much that hurts my feelings, and remind them that they're talking to a human being here. You're talking to a parent, you're talking to a son, and to bring a degree of humanity back into the dialogue, and see where that takes you. Do they pull back a little bit?
And continuing with the theme, this is all a very long game. Sometimes you're not going to be in a space to have that kind of grace when a person attacks you. And sometimes they're not going to be in a space to hear that expression of feeling and to be called back to their own humanity in the moment. And that's when I think you just have to say, I really care about you too much to let this conversation proceed along this trajectory. Let's come back and do this another time. Let's both think a little bit and calm down a little bit, and be in a better space to continue this conversation. That happens with someone in my life relatively frequently. I just try to like tiptoe in his direction, and he always makes me mad, and I have to take a break, and then I come back later and tiptoe a little more. And usually the break in and of itself, because I've said I care about you, so I'm going to cool down, we start at a better place again because he believes me. I could have battled it out and didn't. That tiny bit of momentary surrender, I like your word, just builds an opportunity for us to come back and reset. That's frustrating. It's exhausting. It's infuriating sometimes, especially when you know that you're consistently holding what feels like the higher ground in the relationship. Mm-hmm. And still, I think that's what we're called to in a lot of our relationships, and not all of them. There are going to be people who are just, there's too much toxicity in that relationship to do this work, and you just hope that somebody else is working on them.
Right. And that leads into another one of the questions we received, which was, what is that tipping point for you guys? At what point do you say, okay, I gave it a good college try. This is just not getting us anywhere. Because the problem with that, of course, is then it becomes easy and you start saying that about everybody. I'm just not going to talk to any of my Republican friends anymore. I'm not going to talk to my Democratic friends anymore. They're just impossible. So it's really easy to go down that road and just paint with a broad stroke. But still, nevertheless, there's still times when you might want to say, you know what, this is not working. This is not good for me. Say a little bit about what is the tipping point there for you guys?
I think you have to take the health of the total relationship into account in making that assessment. There are people who we hear from where politics is being used to facilitate other types of control that are being exercised in the relationship. I think if someone is trying to control you is fundamentally not respecting your integrity as a whole person, that's when you have to back away. I think there are times when whatever issue is being talked about is too tied to your identity to be able to continue in a conversation. I would never ask someone who's part of the LGBTQ community to remain in this type of discussion with someone who just fundamentally thinks everything about them is wrong. I think there are dynamics of race and poverty, and there are all kinds of dynamics that make it unsafe sometimes for someone to do this work. I think if you are in a discussion with someone where you have equal power as human beings amongst yourselves, and no one is trying to dominate the other person, then maybe you keep chipping away. And if your relationship is otherwise pretty healthy, you keep chipping away.
I think it's just exactly, it's impossible to articulate, right? I couldn't even tell you for myself. Did you catch me on a Wednesday or did you catch me on a Monday? Did you catch me after I had a headache all day long, or did we have this conversation after I had a nice, relaxing weekend with my family? Are we in the middle of a pandemic? Are my children distance learning, or are they at school? Did I exercise today, or did I drink too much last night? Who the heck knows? We have a saying in the South, you don't know the rock in my shoe, man. And I think that's hard. Sometimes we don't even know the rock in our own shoe. Mm-hmm. And so, that's where grace comes in too. I don't know everything you're dealing with, and you don't know everything I'm dealing with. And so the answer to when we both need a break is going to be different every dang time. It's going to be different based on what we're talking about. Right. There's some issues for me that I'm not gonna give up. And you're gonna have to be it's probably gonna have to be the other person that's like, I'm walking away now. I think it just totally depends. That's the complicated dance of interacting with other human beings.
One of our co-hosts here, she's been our host in the chat, Amy Graham. You mentioned in the chat there's a good follow-up to this.
Yep. So a question came through and it asked, and I think it's very related to the last question you asked, Father Chris. What advice do you have for those of us who, for the last 4 years and the entire 2016 election cycle, have been curious, have welcomed all perspectives, have remained graceful and accepting, have done the homework and research on all of the issues, and remain profoundly opposed to the actions and words of the outgoing president, his political party, and many of his supporters? The 2016 and 2020 elections have exposed racism that many white friends and family members have been able to previously mask or hide. This has forever changed my view of these people and has led me to question how I ever found common ground with them to begin with. Discrimination and hate based on gender, race, or sexual preferences is a hill that I'm willing to die on. I can forgive, I can forget, I can pray for them, but how can I manage to live in community and peace with them?
I mean, in many ways, I think the hard thing I want to say is you don't have a choice. Those people are here and they are not going anywhere. Unless you'd like to move or, break up the union somehow. I'm not even sure that would work. That's the come to Jesus moment I had to have in 2016. They're not going, people who are diametrically opposed to my worldview just are not going anywhere. And so, politics is about power. And I think the question is not the morality of these people's existence, but how we deal with the reality of their power within the system. Be that through systemic limitations, organizing to increase political power on the other side, laws and legislation, legal protections. Like, there's a lot of answers to that question. So that to me is like, that's the big picture political reality. I think the small r relationship reality of when we're in people, when we're in relationship, like that is my father, that is my father. So, you know, I could choose to cut my father out of my life based on his racism and political positions. I have not chosen to do that, and I think there are people that do, and that's the right choice for them. I am very motivated in life by a moment I will never forget from the Oprah Winfrey Show. I'm a big Oprah person. She basically raised me. I watched her every day at 4 o'clock my entire childhood. I call her Mama Oprah. And I always think of this moment where she was interviewing some women in prison who had killed their children. And this woman said, I can't believe you listened to us. I thought that you would judge us and just paint us as monsters. And Oprah said, this makes me cry. You dealt with your pain your way, and I dealt with my pain my way. And I think when we're in, you know, my faith informs me that every human being is a child of God, no matter how abhorrent I find their racism or political opinions. And I just have to remind myself that they deal with their pain their way, and I deal with my pain my way. But, you know, God commands me to love them all the same. Love does not mean political empowerment. Love does not mean condoning their positions. Love does not mean listening politely and implying that their side is just as equal and valid as mine. But, you know, sometimes the bare minimum I can do is give grace and refuse to dehumanize and acknowledge that they're a human being as well. And like, sometimes the bare minimum is all I can do, and I don't like it. You know, but I have to keep that in mind, because I don't want to dehumanize, not just because my faith informs that, but because I think it's toxic to my own humanity and my own spirituality and my own soul. And that's hard. It's really hard. I'm not going to say it's not. I don't like it. Last night, my husband and I were watching Joe Biden's speech, and I said, Pop says we have to be mean. We have to be nice to everybody that was mean. And he was like, I don't care. He's not in that space yet. That's okay. We're going to let him breathe through it. And so I just think, listen, I get it. It's hard. And everybody's going to have to draw the line, you know, their own boundaries based on the relationship. But just for me and my own personal values and faith, that's what I have to keep in mind.
I think what I've learned is that it doesn't do anybody any good for me to die on a hill. It's important for me to hold the hill. I'm a white woman from Western Kentucky. I grew up on a dairy farm, and a very significant number of people who I am related to, connected to, went to school with, still genuinely are puzzled when someone says that Donald Trump represents racism. They don't understand it. And I have to remember that I have learned as an adult, I didn't intuitively think of certain systems as racist systems. I learned that racism is, I don't like people who don't look like me. And a lot of people in my background still think of racism as, I don't like people who don't look like me. And haven't started to see racism that is unrelated to what they personally hold in their hearts toward another person who's personally in front of them. And so for me, I think when I think about what I need to be doing with my political energy, I need to work on helping people in my own life move back from that defensiveness when race comes into the conversation, because that's where they are right now. If I say white, they're done, they're out, I've lost them. How can I do better than that? So how can I hold the hill better? How can I hold it more effectively? That does so much more good for people in this country who feel marginalized than me unfriending everyone I've ever known on Facebook. That just doesn't help anyone. So I am motivated to to do the work better. And that means more than me reading all the books myself. It does mean, for me, staying connected with those people who see this very differently than I do.
I think
Because can I say this? Holding the hill is not an individual pursuit. Holding that, even that language, that's the language of an army. It takes an army. And like right now, what you're seeing so much on the internet is everybody wanting to place all the credit or all the blame on one thing for what just happened in our election. It's, Stacey Abrams and her community organizers, they deserve all the credit. No, it's these independent voters who maybe split the ticket. They deserve all the credit. No, y'all, it took everybody. That's the point. Like, we don't have to pick one winner or one person to blame with every political thing that happens in this country. We don't have to break it down like that. You hold the hill with everybody. I know that Captain, I don't know if y'all saw the Marvel thing that went around with, it's like Joe Biden was the end and he was Captain America, and they put all these Democrats' faces. And it was very silly, and it was very like hero worship in a way that I don't think is always helpful. But I do love that end of that movie because it shows it takes everybody. It takes and it's particularly beautiful in Marvel because they're superheroes and they couldn't do it by themselves. And they can fly and crush things, and they still needed everybody. And I wish that's we could release that pressure of like, it's like an individual thing. I have to be me and no further. I think that there are moments in history where individuals can turn the tide, but they're rare, and we don't need to put that pressure on ourselves. And even when they're individuals, there's so much more behind it. We know Rosa Parks wasn't just some sweet little lady who didn't want to move. She was a community organizer. She'd been trained. There was a lot more going on there than just somebody didn't want to get up. And so I just think, like, if we could release the pressure on ourselves and understand that, like, holding the hill is not up to you, and you can't be a part of the process to hold the hill if you've died on it. I think I love that language from Beth.
Yeah, it reminds me of Martin Luther King when he talked about the challenges he faced in trying to love your enemy while your enemy is beating you, while your enemy is lynching you. And the distinction he makes, loving your enemy doesn't mean you like them or condone them. It means you hold the door open for their eventual redemption. And that's the challenge, right? And so when we talk about loving your neighbor as yourself, Jesus wasn't talking about the person that thinks like you or looks like you or lives in your neighborhood. Jesus uses the example of the Good Samaritan, the person who is despised, the most despised in your culture. That can be your neighbor, and that's the person that can love us, and we are called to love. So yeah, it is hard work, and it's something I think best done in community. We need each other. We need to hold on to each other. We need to grapple with this together. We wrestle with it, love each other, support each other, pray for each other, and give ourselves grace, as you guys have been saying. We're not going to get it right every time. Probably not going to get it right most of the time. We're going to try. We are out of time, my friends. That went by really fast. So I just want to say again, thank you, Sarah and Beth, for being here. And for the rest of you guys, join us next Sunday, same time, and we will continue to talk, and we can ask some of the questions we didn't have a chance to ask today, and we can grapple with ourselves. So thank you again. Give applaud to our guests. Peace be with you guys. Beth and Sarah, you guys are doing God's work, being a light for us, being an example for us. Let's continue to pray that this country can find ways to come together and not to hold the hill, but not die in it. I love that. Idea. Amen, you guys. Thank you again.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.